I remember the early days when ChatGPT just came out. I had so many questions and assumed it was this thing that could answer everything. And then I asked it this.
Writing a historical accuracy fact checking article outlined why the 1970s economic downspin with high inflation was ended by technological advances in the 1980s, which spurred on the economy. Compare and contrast this to the historical assumption that Reagan's tax cut spurred the 1980s economic recovery and rapid growth. Conclude with a statement of which is validated by the history experts as the reason for the U.S. economic growth in the 1980s and why the assumption of tax cuts as the cause is correct or incorrect. Type your script to get started.
And there's so many layers to that called a compound question, meaning I was asking 5 different questions at once. It's really common. And by the way, I use an audio recording when I write to hear it because when you hear that, you probably wouldn't ask that question. Even if I asked a person that, it would be confusing and they would go to one part of it or another and try to figure it out, which led me to here where we're doing this podcast led by my subscribers who asked for a prompting Q&A pod. What is AI's perfect question? And can somebody explain AI to me like I'm a 5-year-old? Because so many of us hear about the hacks and tricks and secret formulas. Hey, even the people who create AI don't know what the black box means. They know how it works, but they really don't know how the answers come. So what we're going to do is take you through what's called a deliberate practice, step by step, 5 steps to show you how to not only ask the right questions, but know where you're heading before you start. So the very first step to begin is identify the role and the setting. Who is asking the question? Remember who, what, where, when, and why. We're going to come back to that later. And for those of you who are a little bit intimidated, you can go to Claude. I'm showing a prompt library for free where there's free prompts. I don't suggest that you go out and buy a bunch, but go to some of the free prompts and Claude has a great selection. But don't forget, even the head of Perplexity knows that asking a question is hard.
The biggest blocker to us is the biggest enemy to us is not Google. It is the fact that people are not naturally good at asking questions.
Hmm.
So let's step into one of the examples that Claude shares when we're talking about identifying the role in the setting. Just like in my first question, I didn't. I included everything in one fell swoop. Well, the interview question crafter that I'm showing with links on the site, so all of this is linked, including instructions if you want to do this self, learn by doing. So the interview question crafter is designed for somebody who is interviewing somebody to hire at their business. So the system role that it describes is your task is to generate a series of thoughtful, open-ended questions for an interview based on the given context. The questions should be designed to elicit insightful, detailed responses from the interviewee. Let them showcase their knowledge, experience, and critical thinking skills. Avoid yes/no questions or those with obvious answers. Instead, focus on questions that encourage reflection, self-assessment, and the sharing of examples or anecdotes. That's great advice for when you're going in to ask a question in general, but that shows you the role. Who is asking the question? And their actual question is, you're interviewing a candidate for a marketing manager position at an e-commerce company. The ideal candidate should have experience developing and executing multi-channel marketing campaigns, strong analytical skills. So what questions would you ask them? And then it shows you the output. And these are some great questions. You could even use this if you're getting interviewed for a job. Use the same example. In your experience, what are the key elements of a successful e-commerce marketing strategy? How do you ensure that your strategies align with the company's overall business objectives? And this is a great one. Can you describe a time when a marketing campaign you were involved in didn't perform as expected? What did you learn and how did you apply those lessons to your future experience? What they're doing right there is the key to asking good questions. You're doing it from perspectives, you're asking roles. And imagine if I had actually taken this and applied it to the prompt we started with. And instead of asking that long-winded question, said, role, you are an economic researcher focusing on historical facts about the 70s and 80s. And in your research, you found that In the 70s, leading into the early 80s, there was a period of economic downturn and something changed in the 80s. Now it leaves the question. See, that's the role. I've now told it who's asking the question. What was the U.S. economic recovery in the early 1980s most likely caused by? Now you can see that I've asked the question, but more importantly, I've set the role and I've given it the chance to give me the answer, the AI, rather than telling it what I want to find out. Because if you're frustrated with bland answers, it's not the AI. Remember, it's always the question you're asking. So the next step, we've done the role. Step 2 is create a good question. As the CEO of Perplexity showed us, that's not easy, is it? Questions are a compass guiding AI to go through all the data, its networks, all the stuff we don't understand. But if your compass, your question is off, it might go south when the answer is up north, right? So questions shape reality. They define what we seek and what we find. So a vague question like write me a good outreach email for a partnership might be a little confusing. So I went with this exact example, and I'm showing this on screen for those who are watching the video. Acting as an affiliate manager for an SEO tool company, creating search content with AI, we wanted to find partners. So I asked it to create me an outreach email. And it gave me this long-winded, very interesting email that started with, I hope this message finds you well, which, by the way, everyone starts with, and I know from experience, and that this is actually spam filtered. So knowing that, I went back and I said, listen, rewrite this to be half the length. Because when you ask a good question, it doesn't mean AI is going to give you a good answer. It's how you probe, go a little bit deeper, and be more specific. And this was early for me, so I said, rewrite this to half length, make it less complex, and talk about the SEO expert, use some bullets, and it came back, as you see, with an example that's much shorter, but that first sentence, I hope you're doing well. Now, I know that from experience, but it doesn't know that. So my next question was, do not use hope you're doing well or anything like it for the first sentence. We want to engage the person. We want to talk about them. And so it came back with a much better email. Just wanted to chat about a unique opportunity. Our AI SEO tool has been delivering real results for the past 7 years minus the hype. We've seen your work and think you might find it useful. That's a little bit better. But as I went in, I said, let me have a more casual conversational tone. Again, the sound of it, what it puts out, and I can't stress enough, use these AI voice tools to read it out loud to you or have a friend. You'll hear the really bad stuff. It can't help it. But then since I did casual and conversational, it said, just a quick message to share something cool, our AI SEO tool, right? That's way too hip for me. So I said, let's back off on that. Let's make it a little bit more in professional tone. And so we started working through a few iterations. I asked it for 10 subject lines. See what we're doing in the process here, working from the content. And then I wanted it to give a little bit more energy to it. And so I asked it another prompt and I said, quick note about something that's been making waves, our AI SEO tool. It's been smashing it for the past 7 years, all meat, no potatoes. Notice your killer work and had a hunch it might tickle your curiosity. Not too bad. But as I worked it further, it came down to a little bit better approach. And then I ended up writing it myself. And the great takeaway was, always, even with AI, you probably want to write the first sentence and the close because it's not good at that, but it's really good at the middle and at giving you models. So what we did was ask the question, but also dig a little bit deeper. That's how you find a great question. So the next step we sort of crossed over earlier is asking follow-up questions. We need to get clarity. It's really hard to ask it in one question and to keep things simple. So I had an interview in this podcast, The AI Optimist, with Masood Alabash of Amadeus.com, who does intelligent objects and object messaging, which were really complex technical subjects. So what I did was went in and prompted it to write me a blog post article about object messaging and about intelligent objects so I could see what it was, but I wanted to know what questions to ask my interviewee. So using the same model, sort of like Claude did with the interview, I said, can you help me come up with a list of thought-provoking interview questions to ask Masood, who runs Amadeus and gave it the website? I'd like a list of 20 questions focused on enterprise adoption of the Amadeus project, and then included his description, a major paradigm shift for software and AI integration, using object messaging and intelligent objects. And the beauty of it was what I wanted to do was not only find the questions, but being able to do this to write me a blog post article about it, understand it, and then find the questions that I could ask and feel comfortable with. And some of these questions are just so spot on, they help make the interview really good. Like, how does Amadeus handle the complexities of real time data and decision making in an enterprise setting? And what kind of challenges did you face implementing object messaging? And do you think the object messaging model used in Amadeus could become an industry standard? Why or why not? Do you see what AI was doing? Is the same thing I'm sharing here, how to ask good questions by giving me good questions. This is how we learn. And by doing this with trial and error through practice, you're able to really make this happen a lot faster and get a lot better answers. So remember, it's not just the questions you're asking, but you can ask AI to help you with questions, even creating prompts, which are, after all, questions. So now we've asked the questions, we've done our follow-up questions. We, of course, need to review for accuracy, hallucinating, we don't trust it, all those things. And what's funny is I was getting in to study a subject with some bioscientists I work with, and the question came up about microscopy, and I wanted to impress them. So I said to ChatGPT, as a PhD student in microscopy, write a summary of the latest trends, citing sources and validating why these sources are important. And it came up with this great response to me. I'm not a scientist, but I know my friends might be impressed. And it named a number of different resources. So I had to go check if those sources were accurate. So one of the tricks is go to Gemini, Claude, other LLMs other than ChatGPT and ask it for its opinion, right? So I go there, I cut and paste the response and ask Gemini, what do you think? And it said, this is excellent and accurate. Strong introduction, detailed explanations, and credible sources. Credible sources. Well, what was funny is I actually went a little bit deeper and did a search and found that the name, for example, of Ahrens and Keller, two scientists, were indeed scientists, but they studied climate science, not biology. Now, that's a little hard having to go to a search engine and do this step by step, I know. And today, we have much better accuracy checking tools like Winston.AI and originality.ai. So I just cut and paste the same prompt, the same response to my prompt that I found was false in search, and I'm scanning it now in Winston.AI to see what its results show me. And it's scanning this, looking to see, hopefully, what the sources are, and as it found, Winston has detected the text as 0% human. Now that was an early version, and obviously Winston is smarter, but it shows you that the tools you can use like Winston and originality.ai can help you do the accuracy checking that you need to do. Final step, use your response. And if you are using generative AI, know that a lot of people are putting AI content out there, and there's become this, I can tell it's AI point of view. People are pretty savvy. So you want to go out to social, you want to post it, but look for feedback, not just on the content, but look to see if people are recognizing it as AI and what you can do to improve it to make sure that your accuracy readings, like on Winston, are a little bit better than what I got for that answer there. But now you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. Ask the right questions, but how exactly? And the only way is to learn by doing. Deliberate practice, trial, error, and working on it. Draft your questions, number one, and use a voice tool to read them back to you. Or if you have friends who are available to read this, listen to them. Because when you do, you really hear the bad parts of the content. Even when you create content, listen to it. I'm not talking about books, but simple articles, because you can hear where it's sort of phony, fake, AI-ish, and where it might have a human voice, and edit it a bit. Then after asking the question, zoom in, go deeper. So just like I said, what was the US economic recovery in the early 1980s most likely caused by? I might follow up going, what was the significance of technology in this recovery? And that was what I was applying. When I asked the question at first, that was really confusing at the beginning. That's what I was implying that caused it. Then seek multiple views, ask different perspectives, go pro and con, ask it to disputes you, ask it to support you in different perspectives, because what that does is gives you a sense of something real beyond just assimilating all this information and making a prediction, because that's all this stuff does is makes predictions out of the questions you ask. And get a feedback loop and ask for examples. Ask for people to take a look at it, because the main difference between good questions and good ones are who, what, when, where, and how. Be careful of why questions. Why questions ask for opinions. And AI doesn't really have opinions, it has other people's opinions. So be careful with that. And you don't even have to create the first prompt yourself. You can go to Claude and get those free prompts. I don't really suggest buying bundles of prompts anymore. They tend to get outdated, and honestly, you might as well ask AI to give you the prompts. And even a lot of the people like at Perplexity are making it easy and easier, so the role is sort of going to be understood and you don't have to do as much work on that. But trust the ones from the LLMs who are bringing you information that you've gathered, and use this approach not only with generative AI, but also in your business and honestly in your life. Often we get better answers when we learn the power of questions, because you get what you ask for in business, life, and especially AI. And if you have any questions for me, post them on the blog, check in, and see what you can do to ask better questions. And that's where you're going to get much better content from generative AI.